Hi, my name is Richard Alm, and I'm with the Bridwell Institute at the Southern Methodist University, the School of Business. And I want to welcome you to our ninth Texas Economic Forum. This is the first one that we've had under the auspices of the Bridwell Institute. The first 8 Texas Economic Forums were conducted by the O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom, which was our predecessor. We were renamed a month or so ago to the Bridwell Center to commemorate a donation by Tucker Bridwell, a Texan, a fine Texas businessman from Abilene. The personnel and mission of the O'Neill Center are the same as at the Bridwell Center. We're partnering today with the Bush Institute, George W. Bush Institute-SMU Economic Growth Initiative, to bring you 4 presentations relevant to the DFW economy. I'm going to have to. All right, we're going to have 4 presentations. We're going to have Michael Cox and I are going to talk about the title concept of the improbable economic superstars. Susan Arledge and Susan Gwin Burks are going to talk about the site selection game. Colin Clark has something on eds and meds, and Joe May is going to talk about education in the labor force. So, the improbable economic superstar. It's one thing before we get going here is that most of the work on this was done pre-pandemic, although several of our presentations have extended their analysis and thoughts to include what's happened in the past year. So, the improbable economic superstar. We think we're using that to describe DFW. So the first thing I want to try to convince you is that DFW is an economic superstar in a very real sense. If you look at the GDP growth in the last 2 decades, the first 2 decades of the 21st century, you see that the local economy has grown by 70%, which compares to less than 40% for the average for all MSAs combined. And if we look at, and if we look at job creation, you get a similar result. The DFW job creation is up 45% over those 2 decades, compared to about 20 in the low 20s for the nation and for the other economic superstars. Now, so what's the improbable part then? The improbable part is that this economic superstar has grown up on the pancake flat plains of North Texas, very far from the usual genesis of superstar cities. If you look at the great cities, American cities of the past, and probably world cities, they usually have something to do with water, either on the sea coasts or on navigable rivers. So you have New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, New Orleans, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle. What do they have in common? They have water. They're on water, and that created the impetus for trade in both in goods and people and ideas. And the second thing that's unusual about Dallas among American cities, it's a latecomer. It didn't really get, we weren't founded until after the, I think it was the 1840s, but we really didn't catch much forward momentum until after the Civil War and the arrival of the railroads. And you say, well, the railroads were our water, but that would be true for almost every city in America, and because everybody was connected, between 1870 and 1900, the entire country was knit together by railroads. So, but we are the one city that of those that came out as an economic superstar. Not Omaha, not Oklahoma City, anything like that. But to reinforce the latecomer thing is if you came to Dallas in the 1950s, it was a nice place, maybe a lot of good business going on, but it wasn't a superstar. Dallas did not actually become an economic superstar until the oil crisis of the 80s pushed the Texas economy towards diversification, and we became a superstar. So I am now going to turn the program, this section over to my colleague in the Bridwell Institute, Dr. Michael Cox, who's going to give you some economic reasons why we are an economic superstar, improbable or not.
Okay, great, thank you. Can everybody see my map? Sure. Thank you. All right, so this is a map of U.S. metropolitan area economic freedom in 2012, where the most free MSAs are in blue and the least free in red. And these are quartiles here, 25% black brackets of MSAs. That's for 1 year, 2012. Our colleague in the Bridwell Institute, Dean Stanzel, puts this together, and he's been doing it for several years, and he's actually has got data all the way back to 1972. So let's now look for the 40 years between 1972 and 2012, what of the largest 50 MSAs, which were the most free? So I'm trying to get 50 of them on one screen, which I did here, 17, and then 16 on the right. Now, what you see when you look at this is that Dallas turns out to be the most economically free MSA amongst these 50. How this calculation is made, I don't have time to go into. I invite you to go to our Bridwell Institute website and look at it, or talk to Dean. But Dallas turns out to be number one on average over that 40-year period, with, look who's at the bottom: New York, some of the northeastern cities, Buffalo, Cleveland. I'm pointing out some cities I'm going to talk about later, Los Angeles, and so on. All right, so what difference does that make? Well, let's divide the 100, let's go now up to 100 largest MSAs and divide them into most free 20, the next most free 20, and all down to the bottom 20. I'm gonna do fifths this time, not fourths. Okay, so if you divide them that way and you put to the left here the most free fifth of MSAs, what do you see? You see that the cities, the MSAs, who are the most economically free, have had, over this time period for which we have data, the BEA doesn't go back real far with their data, but over the time period for which data is available, the free cities grow the fastest in terms of GDP. You also see that they create the most jobs. This is one of the most, the biggest differences you'll find is in job creation. 17.2% jobs created on average in the freest 20 MSAs from 2001 to 2014, compared to much smaller numbers as you lose freedom. What else do you see? Business formation is higher in the free MSAs. This is the number of establishments. We churn more. We have more out with the old, more in with the new. And that's what keeps an economy strong in the long run. I should have begun by saying to you before I started this that I'm going to look at the long run here first, flourishing over the long run, and then the short run. We all wish we were back in the long run, because especially Dallas in the long run is doing really good. I wouldn't say I wanted to be in the long run if I was in Buffalo, but in Dallas I do. And so we have the economy, we have the economic freedom it takes to build that economy over the over the long run. Keep it fresh, keep it moving. And cost of living is lower here than in any other, lower in the 50, 20 MSAs are the freest than you see on average across here. It's a place where you can go and make a better life for your for yourself and your family with a lower cost of living after adjusting for taxes and after adjusting for prices in the local area, especially housing prices. So that's a plus too when it comes to migration. And if you look at migration across America, you'll see that the most free-fifth of our MSAs are accumulating population, while the least free-fifth, and this is going to include New York, and it's going to include Los Angeles and so on, that group are losing people. And the more they lose, the more they raise taxes and the more they lose. So freedom is a plus for just about every dimension. For the conclusion from that section, I could go into it in more depth, but I don't have the time, is that the economic performance of an MSA over the long run depends on economic freedom. The rest can adjust. You can get the sectors you need. If something is growing, if something is shrinking, you can deal with that. If you don't have that, then you can't deal with it. And this is what happened to 6 American cities in terms of their populations from 1810 over to 2007. You see that Cleveland, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Buffalo didn't adjust. But most of these rode the wave of the manufacturing era on up, and then they rode it down. And that's not a solution. Nothing is going to take you to bliss forever. You have to change, and flexibility is the key for that. And the key for that is economic freedom, resilience. Now, Dallas, it turns out, DFW is quite a diversified place now. Maybe we weren't at one time. Maybe you think Houston is not that diversified, but every MSA in America is got its favorite sectors. Think about Los Angeles, think about movies, think about any part of the country. In New York, you're going to find financial there. So we're actually quite diversified when it comes down to it. So the economic performance of an MSA, the short run though, what we're facing today, depends on 3 things. Which sectors, if you're having a national economic downturn, which sectors are the most affected and to what degree? And also, which sectors does your MSA have and to what degree? And then finally, back to this important thing, the ability to withstand a shock, resilience, economic freedom in that MSA. All right, so let's now look at the national economic downturn. This is annually adjusted quarterly GDP growth back to 2016. First quarter, this is the national level. First quarter, 5% downturn as COVID first hit. Second quarter, minus 32.7% at an annually adjusted rate. Now, I was completely shocked when I went to the data about a couple of weeks ago when the September data came out, and found out that we were having a 31.8% rebound. America is going through the greatest period ever of creative destruction. Usually the creation happens first and the destruction comes. So you have the car industry, and because you have cars now and you can build that industry, and when the carriage industry goes down, it's okay. But this time we had it in reverse. The destruction came first. It was enormous, and the economy had to adjust. It had to create in new places and in new ways that weren't available before. Zoom is a great example of it. You can look at the stocks and you can see in America to see how the creation has come. So this is a huge downturn, but it's also a really darn good recovery. Where did it, what sectors did it hit? Well, this is the BEA data, and it's different than the BLS data on jobs, but in terms of GDP, the worst hurt was recreation services. The depth of the brown bar there is how far we went down, and it's not even annually adjusted. I'm sorry, these are annually adjusted for GDP. Okay, so we saw about a 72% decline at an annually adjusted basis in recreation services, transportation equipment. If you're Boeing, sure. Transportation, I mean, I'm going to be certainly, for every sector, you can find somebody suffering. And it doesn't matter even, what it is. But in Dallas, we have these 2 large airlines, we have energy, we have Exxon, we have entertainment like everybody else. And so you see here, food services and accommodation did get hit. Clothing stores, people stopped going to the stores, buying gasoline, they weren't driving their car, didn't buy as much durable equipment, let the refrigerator and their appliances hang on a while in their car until they could get to some of the other side of this. So some parts of the economy were certainly more affected than others. That's the data from the BEA. You can see the thing least hurt on the right, in fact, even helped, were computers and related equipment, because people had to get a computer for their household and start doing things at home. Now, let's look at the job losses. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They slice things up a little differently. What do you see? Arts, entertainment, recreation, hurt. Accommodation and food services, hurt. These are sectors which Dallas has, and we have a lot of it. We have restaurants, we have bars, we have hotels, we're a recreation center. It's certainly, we have our sports teams. It's certainly, we certainly have these sectors, retail and leasing, administrative and waste services, retail, all these things, retail's gotten hurt, construction, and so on. Now, what do you see? I forgot to tell you what's going on with this other line. This blue line is the rebound, okay? That's the rebound that happened all the way back up to from third to fourth quarter. We saw rebounds to the point where, for example, in arts, entertainment, and in recreation and services, we almost got back half of the GDP we lost. The same thing is true in terms of jobs. We lost 77. This is not annually adjusted now. This is actual job losses in arts, entertainment, and recreation. 77.1% of the jobs lost in that sector nationally, but look at the recovery back to only 42.9% being lost. So again, we do have these sectors. And if you look over to mining about halfway through the middle to the right, yes, of course, we have that sector too. Even here in Dallas, we feel that. It's not Houston, but we have it. The sector least affected was finance and insurance. Now, let's see how that all played out in terms of the largest 20 MSAs. Here they are, ranked from the left to the worst hit to the least worst hit, with Detroit being hit a 28.1% decline in jobs, but they bounced back from February to September, only being, and I say only in comparison with how bad it got, they're now up to having lost 11.1% of the jobs. Now, if you look over here to the right, you're going to find we're the third. We fared third the best. Now, again, I know that everybody is having a hard time, but it's good to know that you're having a recovery, and your MSA is resilient, and apparently we are. 0.2% of our jobs. Then we gained 5.3% back, so we're down 4.9%, which is a lot better than elsewhere. Dallas wasn't less affected in the COVID-19 downturn because we have sectors that didn't suffer. We do have those sectors. Bottom line is we were less affected because we're more economically free, more able to rebound, more able to adjust, more resilient. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Michael. Susan Gwin Burks is up next.
Thank you, Richard. Let me pull up my screen here with you. Okay, I'm assuming everybody can see that. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Just get your little thing to make it big.
Okay. Thank you so much. I forgot that piece. How about that? Okay. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the site selection process and what we call site selection sweepstakes. As you all know, some may not, but Dallas and Fort Worth were initially developed due to the construction of major railroads. And it came through the area. It allowed access to cotton, cattle, and of course later oil in North and East Texas. Since that time, we've grown considerably, but as we all know, great cities don't just happen. They are truly nurtured, and they're nurtured over time, and they're put on a path to success by strong local leadership, really visionaries in that city, business expansion, and creativity. And what a path we have been put on, continually reaping great results that have led to a population of about 7.5 million residents currently. And it has put DFW as the most populous metropolitan area in both Texas and the Southern United States. We're also the 4th largest in the US and the 10th largest in the Americas. So we're constantly on the radar screen of investors and corporations and individuals who are looking for a great place to call home. It has definitely earned us the bragging rights, as you'll see here, as we've been in the news over the last 2 years. We're in the #1 spot for best city for jobs, most business-friendly city in America, city for investing, city for starting a business, and most family-friendly as well. We're in the #2 spot for the most active total construction, largest growing metro in the US, and we're in the #4 spot as metros with the most Fortune 1000 companies. So over time, obviously, a whole lot of factors contributed to DFW's success and growth, with the main ones being low government regulation and taxes. And of course, this includes a big one with no state income tax. Central time zone, that was a God-given right, but it's easier to access from both the West Coast and the East Coast. So we're smack dab in the middle. And DFW International Airport. And this truly is a big one, because when Toyota compared us to other markets, and the Toyota relocation of recent, they compared us to other markets, and our international air service was definitely a big driver. We also have been at the top of the charts with affordable and abundant housing. And of course, our quality of life, it's talked about a lot as a positive and a place that people want to come for their families and to have access to all of the amenities that we have. We also have a large educated labor pool, and of course, a very can-do business climate. So all of those things obviously have set us up over time for great success. I do think it's interesting to note that recently, when real estate developers and corporate service professionals were asked where DFW is positioned in the site selection contest for corporate relocations and headquarter development on a scale of 1 to 10, the average response from all was the average of 9.5. Now, I know what you're thinking, and yes, they are partial to our market because they're here, but these folks are out there every day, and they're in the trenches, and they see the high level of activity. They see the highly sought after successes that we've been able to achieve. And the numbers speak for themselves. And currently, by code name, there are a lot of corporate relocations, a lot of companies looking to come into the Metroplex for the reasons we talked about here, the lower taxes and regulations, quality of life. So because the DFW Metroplex encompasses 13 counties, it gives corporations then a multitude of cities and locations to choose from for site selection decisions. The Economic Development Councils, or our EDCs, within those counties all work together, believing that a win for one is truly a win for all. And it really heightens DFW's position in the long run and draws attention to the successes in our collective market. Another classic example of this was Amazon's pursuit recently, where the Chamber of Commerce, the regional chamber, and the EDCs, they all work together, and they showcase DFW to help the real estate professionals show how competitive we truly are, how competitive we can be. I mentioned earlier strong local leadership as a driver, and it's on our path to success. It has truly played a huge role, as we all know, in DFW's success in attracting State Farm's regional hub to Richardson, because the local leadership focused early on a light rail station. They came out the clear winner in the scorecard process. Good access to public transportation was indeed reflective of a clear strategy to attract and retain talent. Creativity was also mentioned earlier as a driver, and it plays to how the development community in DFW thinks. Really, no longer is space looked at as a sheer commodity for corporations. It's looked at as part of their brand part of a corporation's brand. And therefore, it has in fact become a big part of their ability to hire and retain people, which is at the top of their list. They're vying for good talent, and they certainly want to keep it. Developers are looking for ways to create both events and environments that enhance that ability to hire and retain their employees, thus giving them and our marketplace a clear edge. You know, this can also be seen in the emphasis on amenities for employees, creating office design and increased walkability, because site selectors typically focus on these in their process. The landlords and the developers in DFW consistently get high marks. It's put us at the top. When asked what sets DFW apart from other major cities or regions, it was felt that one of the big standouts in the overall community in DFW is collaboration and cooperation. Development companies and brokerage companies and real estate professionals are all in lockstep in their commitment to work together for the good of the client and to project DFW out there and as a success continuously. So in closing, as mentioned before, we are very, very, very fortunate to have a long list of influencers for success in our market. In addition, there are 3 important game changers, what I would call game changers, that come to mind, and they make us a clear front runner in the site selection sweepstakes, if you will. Our cities and counties work together for the good of the order. Our developers listen to what the client wants, and they truly embrace change. And lastly is the availability, I'll get that out, and affordability of land. And that positions DFW as a real game changer in the site selection process and as a real front runner. With that, our barriers of entry become lessened and costs become more affordable, boosting our shareholder value. It's been calculated that our population will almost double by the year 2035. That's a big number. I believe we will truly continue to hit it out of the park, and DFW will remain a strong competitor at the top of the charts. Thank you.
Susan Arledge.
Thank you, Richard. All right, I am going to be talking about some of the impacts that COVID has had on our real estate community. Richard, can you see the screen? Perfect. Okay, so one of the things that we're looking at as we're talking about what's going to happen in real estate is what are the trends that we can see in a post-COVID world? Well, the first thing we know is flexibility. Don't ever underestimate the influence of habit formation, because the current work from home environment is definitely going to be habit forming. It's going to result in reduced occupancy levels without a doubt. And people are still struggling with team building and productivity measurement. Most companies haven't tried to build teams from scratch online yet. So that's becoming very confusing, along with the size of real estate people will need. So there's a lot of confusion about how to structure future leases. My entire career has been representing corporate tenants on the tenant representation side in lease and contract negotiations. And if there's one thing a corporate client cannot deal with, it's uncertainty. So one thing we know with certainty is rents are going to drop. And once this lockdown ends, tenants are going to reduce their office space needs. That lack of demand and oversupply is going to drive rent prices down. Good news for Dallas, workers are returning to DFW offices faster than anywhere else in the US. Castle Systems, who measures access and security within premises, I said DFW outpaced all other metros, and our return to work traffic in October was 41%, which was great compared to New York at 16, San Francisco 14, Los Angeles 33, and DC at 26. So the good news is we're open for business. The other good news is that location decisions are continuing to include the Dallas-Fort Worth region. One thing that will not change is the access to highly educated and skilled people is all skewed towards superstar cities like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, DC, Dallas, and Austin. And that's important because young people, educated people between the ages of 25 and 34 have been about half of the population growth since 2010, and that's not anticipated to change. So what's happening in the office market? Well, we're moving from a landlord control to a tenant-driven market. Pre-COVID, tenants were committing to very expensive long-term leases in cool, trendy workplaces purely because they needed to attract and retain talent. Talent attraction drove everything. However, businesses now see that they're going to have about 30 to 50% more space than they need, which is going to result in a lot of sublease space and unleased office space becoming available. So labor costs make up as much as 85% of a company's operating budget. So relocating offices from high-cost areas is going to be a big factor. Here's an example: moving software engineers from San Francisco to New Orleans would save $24,000 a year. That's 250 software jobs. That's $6 million a year, or $60 million over 10 years. So with the concept that remote work means you can hire someone anywhere, a company may not have to be in San Francisco or DC or Chicago to attract the talent that they need. Capital markets are in an interesting extend and pretend mentality. Borrowers have gotten forbearance on loans. Lenders have been flexible. This is definitely not going to last forever. There has been some compassionate capitalism as people have tried to work to figure this pandemic out. We also had unprecedented levels of stimulus. So we expect to see a large drop in values Q1 and Q2 of 2021. And New York City is a good example where Manhattan apartment rents have dropped 11% already from last year, and office occupancy, or people returning to work, is less than 20%. So there is capital, but buyers will want to get paid for assuming that kind of risk. However, the bright shining star is the warehouse and industrial market. Warehouse employment has surpassed pre-pandemic levels to reach the highest level ever recorded, with over 1.25 million workers in this warehouse and storage sector. E-commerce sales are driving this, and those sales are higher than ever before, jumped 32% just from Q1 to Q2 of this year to nearly 212 billion. So e-commerce is surging at a time when the overall economy is really not. However, the industrial market is not immune, because how do you socially distance this? How do you have a separation and provide the resources you need to be able to pick, pack, fulfill, distribute, and get product to the user? Well, the answer to that is probably going to be more and more AI and robotic workforce. So robots can be used to pick and pack, and these little Roomba-like robots will carry all of the stacked packages to the workers that will put them actually on the assembly line. So we're going to see a lot more use of robotics. And here's one of the reasons why: the cost for human pickers versus robotic pickers is huge. In a typical facility with 340,000 square feet, you might have 302 full-time employees cart picking through the aisles. With a highly robotic system, as the bottom one shows, where the robots bring the racks to the people, not people going to the racks, that can be reduced from 302 to 70 people, and the facility size reduced to 290,000 square feet. So it's not hard to see that a more robotic e-commerce distribution operation is being implemented. What everybody is struggling with right now is productivity measures and metrics for this work from home concept. It just hasn't been enough time for productivity measures to be implemented yet. If you make widgets, you can determine, did you sell as many widgets as you sold last year or as you sold last quarter? But when you're in the service or the knowledge-based industry or financial services, it's much harder to measure productivity. So while employees are thrilled by this newfound freedom for remote work, a lot of employers are very concerned about the ability to supervise staff and monitor productivity. And a lot of corporate surveys from employees are biased towards the employee wanting to work from home, so not reliable from a productivity standpoint. Because you can't necessarily measure productivity, meaning merely by tracking hours, computer idle time, or activity, because measuring time is not the same as measuring productivity. So the real question is work from home? Interesting article came out from JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon saying that they would bring their New York City employees back to work on September 21st. The reason for that is he shared a troubling pattern that emerged as most of their employees worked from home. Productivity had slipped. Work output was particularly affected on Mondays and Fridays. And while it seems to have impacted younger employees the most, the bank noticed there's a general decline among employees in general, not just younger employees. And he defined what he said was the overall productivity and creative combustion had taken a hit. So what is most at risk from work from home? Well, MIT research says it's innovation. An MIT research poll said that communication is most effective when done face-to-face because it's more information rich. And they showed a 35% reduction in team performance when that face-to-face exchange did not exist. And I think we all know that the unplanned is every bit as important as the planned. Spontaneous interaction is definitely one of the most reliable paths to innovation. Socializing is productive. Co-workers that socialize have the highest productivity. That requires physical proximity. But being together is critical for young employees, but also for long tenured employees to continue to grow in those roles. So Cornet, the industry trade organization for commercial real estate, conducted a survey of 11,000 corporate real estate execs about when employees will begin to return to work. 50% say it will be at least June of 2021. And in June of 21, they anticipate that no more than 50% of their staff will return on site. 70% said their real estate footprint will shrink over the next years, and 16% say they anticipated no change. So that's reinforced by these major corporate work from home announcements, whereas you can just see some of the largest Fortune 500 tech and knowledge-based companies. The consistent information here is that almost all are extending work from home through June or through June to September of next year, and some through until 2022. So companies are really struggling with the entire concept of work from home and what that means to productivity. So I think for the next 2 years, we're going to see definitely an impact on the office market as tenants begin to take less space, grow back into that space until they get to current day demand. Warehouse, on the other hand, cannot find enough space to accommodate all of the need for e-commerce and distribution. So we'll probably be looking at a rehabbing or adaptive reuse of facilities that these e-commerce companies can use for last mile type research, last mile logistics, meaning you might see mall space being converted to last mile distribution space and some existing retail space, so that for that last mile distribution, they can be as close to the customers as they need to be. So Richard, I'm going to hand this back to you.
All right, thank you very much. Just a reminder that if you have some questions, you could submit them through the Q&A thing at the bottom of your screen. We already have a few, mostly concentrating on the real estate practicalities. But now we want to hear from the eds and meds from Colin Clark.
Thanks, Rick. Can you all hear me, first of all, Rick? Want to nod? Good. So I'm Colin Clark. I lead the domestic economic policy work at the George W. Bush Institute. And on behalf of the Bush Institute, we're delighted to join the Bridwell Institute for Economic Freedom in hosting this. So thanks for having us, Rick. It's good to partner with you and Mike and the team on this. So the topic I want to talk about today, let me put on the screen share just a second. Here we go. Okay, is the economic role of, can you all see the screen okay? Is this working, Rick? Just a second. It's doing some funny things for me here. Okay. Rick, can you say, are you seeing it? I'll assume that you are.
No.
Good. So I want to talk about the role of anchor institutions in higher education.
I'm not getting it. So
you're not seeing it?
No one's got a lot of shaking heads here.
Okay, I'm gonna try again here. Share
screen. There you go. You got it.
Good. Okay. Thank you. I'm obviously not very competent with this, despite my best efforts. So what I'd like to talk about is the economic role of anchor institutions in higher education and healthcare in the economic development and success of cities with special application to our own city of Dallas and the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So this is a topic we've spent a lot of time on at the Bush Institute. It's been a long time interest of mine, and delighted to share some work we've done on it. So what I'm going to do in a handful of minutes, first, just to give a little bit of an overview about the growing role of these institutions in local economies. Second of all, just to give a small taste of some quantitative work we've done at the Bush Institute on the topic. Third is another quantitative piece. It is about the benefits of having a rich eds and meds portfolio of institutions in your city. And then fourth, I really want to apply this analysis to Dallas and just think a little bit about what's happened with Dallas. I think you'll find it's a story that meshes pretty well with what you've already heard today from Rick and Mike and Susan. So let's see, I'm just gonna unshare just for a moment and be myself here for a moment. Oh, that didn't work. So first of all, the role of eds and meds institutions. Well, first of all, these are just very large parts of the economy. Hospitals and higher ed institutions put together are roughly 7% of metropolitan area economies in the United States. It's a growing share. They're very large employers. For example, as you'll see in the DFW area, just the hospital sector employs about 126,000 people, and that's been growing pretty fast. They have giant procurement budgets that are overwhelmingly spent locally. They're big. They have a big land footprint in the cities that they're in as well. So that's one. Second of all, they produce what we economists like to call knowledge spillovers, technology spillovers. They're essentially knowledge producers, particularly through their research-related work. And this knowledge tends to spill over to the wider economy. And on the technology side, a number of economists have shown that the spillovers that come out of university and medical institution research very disproportionately don't travel very far, i.e. the companies that commercialize them others who imitate and improve on their technologies are very likely to be local to a surprising degree. Similarly, they produce what we like to call human capital or knowledge spillovers, in the sense that, well, a university produces a certain number of graduates. In the grand scheme of a big city, that's not necessarily a terribly large number, the number that come out of the one university. But in a sense, the knowledge spreads. And what a number of studies have shown is that even, for example, people of lower educational attainment levels tend to be more productive in places where there's a lot of highly educated people coming out of the university system, or where there's a lot of research taking place. So that's a second benefit. A third benefit, it sounds small, but really shouldn't discount it, is we heard earlier about how important the amenities of DFW are, just the lifestyle issues. And eds and meds institutions create important amenities, whether it's lecture series, whether it is high-end concierge medical services, just the, frankly, the cool vibe of a college town. It turns out people of all ages like it. And you can see that in terms of the, for example, the real estate that tends to go up all around successful universities. All of these roles are growing. The demand for the services that higher ed and healthcare institutions provide are clearly, that demand is clearly rising in both, on both sides. There's essentially, we all know the economy is becoming ever more knowledge-centric. Research, at least in the private sector, is playing a larger and larger role in the economy. It keeps going up as a percentage of the economy. The knowledge content of the products that are coming along today keeps going up as measured in a lot of ways. We're also seeing that research or knowledge-oriented activities are becoming more geographically concentrated. It's a relatively small number of places that are in effect the winners as these trends go on. So that's been an important trend as well. We've also seen higher ed and healthcare institutions really step up their research game. We've seen them hugely increase, for example, the number of postdocs working in research. We've seen them hugely increase the number of patents that they're applying for and being issued, the number of spin-out companies that come out of university or hospital research. So that is all increasing. We're also seeing them kind of throwing their weight around more economically in terms of land use around the university, what kind of built environment they're trying to create. So a larger and larger role. So that's really the first thing that I wanted to talk about. I should say at the same time, with this larger role does come some clear growing pains. I would argue that both the higher ed and healthcare sectors face major questions about the financial sustainability of their current operating models. Neither has been marked by particularly large productivity improvements over recent decades. And I think going back to what Susan has just been talking about, in terms of what we've learned during COVID, well, higher ed has run a giant experiment in remote learning that most would say has not been so great. Probably hasn't been, as terrible as the critics say. Hasn't been an overwhelming success either. Clearly, there's a lot to be learned in how to do that better. Healthcare has conducted a pretty big experiment in telemedicine. My understanding is that on the whole, healthcare professionals think it's gone okay. Still a lot of work to be done on that, but COVID has obviously been at least a great big push towards productivity improvement. But over the long term, we haven't really seen that, and the result is that out of a typical pocketbook, more and more the cost of paying for these services is going up pretty fast in ways that raise major questions about sustainability and really demand some process innovation. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Now let me talk about something we've done quantitatively. So one thing, we wanted to assess quantitatively the role of these institutions in local area economies. So what we did is the following. On the higher ed side, and we were very focused on research-oriented institutions. So in an earlier study, I've worked with some consultants, some experts from a company named Opus Fabio, and we basically measured what we call the innovation impact of US universities, measured by patents they've been issued, license revenue from from technologies that they have commercialized, STEM graduates, the citation of their research in patents by companies and so forth, a wide variety of measures. And so we have numbers for about 200 universities, and then we can add them together at the metro area level and divide by the total population of the metro area to get something that is a measure of the intensity of these activities at the metro area level. Not the grand total. New York's a really big city, it's going to score high. per capita, it may not necessarily. Similarly, with the hospital side, what we've done is essentially take the scale of local area hospital activities, but we, in a sense, give extra credit for hospitals that score very high in essentially US News as a ranking system in a variety of medical specialties. So for example, Mayo Clinic gets lots and lots of extra credit, you could say, in this system. Once again, we create essentially a measure at the level of metro areas that is about essentially the intensity of these activities. So first of all, just two tables. They're a little bit dense, sorry, but I won't spend very long on either of them. Happy to send the slides to anyone who's interested. First, on the higher ed side. On the left side, we show that of the 382 metro areas in the United States, we show the top 30. They are 100% what most people would consider to be college towns, not real surprising. It's just notable how enormously larger the numbers are for the very top performers versus ones a little bit further down. I won't say really more about that, but let's look to the right side. In the right side, we look at the 30 largest metro areas in the United States. And again, what we're measuring in a sense is the intensity of innovation-oriented higher ed activities. It's essentially about the research project of the university. It's not saying anything about how great the universities are at teaching students, as much as we, of course, value that. And what do we see? Well, it's not that surprising maybe that Boston would be at the top. Boston, Pittsburgh, and Austin are pretty far ahead of everybody else. But if you go down, what you actually see is that the three other big Texas metros, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio, are actually all in the bottom third of the top 30. But as Rick said at the very beginning of this discussion, they're all newcomers to this game in the grand scheme of things. These institutions are all very young, as I'll talk about with Dallas in just a moment. It's also notable that some of the very biggest cities like New York and LA are kind of medium players in this regard, not top ones. As for the hospital side, once again, on the left side, top 30 metros are substantially all college towns. They are basically places with big, essentially dominant universities with big medical schools and teaching hospitals attached, and they're mostly not very big cities. But let's look at the 30 on the right, the 30 largest metros. Again, Pittsburgh, Boston, Baltimore rank pretty high. In this instance, Dallas, Fort Worth, as well as Houston and San Antonio are more in the middle category. Again, I would argue rising, but we only have the data for recent years. Third point I want to talk about is what are the benefits of all this? What difference does it make to have a high score in this? Well, it turns out kind of a lot. We have found that both on the education side and the medical side, that having a high intensity of these activities in regression analysis, it tends to predict high educational attainment levels, high income levels, generally high prosperity. For example, the difference between high performing Austin and somewhat lower performing Houston in the education measure predicts a 2.5 percentage point gap in the population share that will have a bachelor's degree or higher, which is a pretty big difference in the grand scheme of big American cities. So it really does make a difference, and it makes a lot, and that's a lot bigger gap than you could predict just by looking at the actual graduates of the institution. It's about knowledge spillovers. It's about creating the kind of economy that companies want to come to and then turn around and attract more people in the future. We also, and we need to do a lot more work on this, this data is sort of suggestive, but it also seems that having high scores in these measures has particularly large effects on the educational attainment levels of local Black and Hispanic populations. Now, let me say a few words about Dallas. So I think the big point that I want to make here is very much back to what Rick said. The Dallas area is a relative newcomer. Our institutions are relatively young in the grand scheme of what's going on in the United States. And what we've essentially seen is a very, very rapid game of catch up, which still has a long ways to go, but we're on our way. Notably, I thought when I first looked into it that SMU, where I'm an adjunct professor and Rick and Mike work, would be the first one founded in the Dallas area. We're actually second if you count Denton. UNT in Denton was founded in 1890, but SMU was pretty tiny as recently as the 1940s and 50s. UT Southwestern founded during World War II, and then UT Dallas, UNT Dallas, and then also with apologies to our friends from Fort Worth, I just wanted to keep the slide relatively simple, so I didn't put Fort Worth institutions, but or the Fort Worth side of the metro area, but UT Arlington, which is on the Fort Worth side. These are really fast growing institutions, and UT Dallas and UT Arlington were both founded in the 60s. In 1985, a key moment when two UT Southwestern researchers won the Nobel Prize in Medicine. It's really the first time that, at least on the life science side, that anyone in Dallas was actually seen as a world leader in this field, and that has happened pretty fast since then. We've had rapid growth in both the number of Nobel Prize winners and the number of globally prominent researchers. UT Dallas only admitted undergrads for the first time in 1990 after I had graduated from college. UT Southwestern only opened the William Clements Hospital, new hospital, in 2014. And this is not just one more building. This is an important point. It's the first time that UT Southwestern has actually had a hospital big enough such that it could be a significant exporter of hospital services, i.e. attract significant numbers of patients from beyond the immediate DFW area. Baylor, of course, was already there, as are a couple other institutions, but it was a pretty big breakthrough. And then, being a proud SMU person, I must note that SMU also very recently completed its largest ever capital campaign, and the times in which SMU is really able to compete at a national level in terms of its endowment, its resources, these times have not been with us very long. This is a pretty new thing. A handful of fun facts about all this, about the impact these institutions have. Today, totally unlike the 1940s, 1950s, 60s, when my mother went to SMU, 60% of SMU undergraduates come to us from outside Texas, but 2/3 of graduates get their first job in DFW, and almost half of all the living alumni of our university are still in the DFW area. So our leading institutions attract people from all over, educate them, and then retain them to a significant degree. UT Southwestern is, I think, a bigger, and I just as well put up Baylor and Presbyterian and so forth, a very big institution, a lot more than people typically realize. 18,000 employees. The total research figure at almost $500 million makes it roughly half the size of the leading Ivy League institutions in terms of total research, but it's just medical. They do a lot of other stuff too. UT Dallas, UT Arlington, and UNT are all among the very fastest growing universities in the United States. And I think this is an interesting stat, that the total enrollment in our area's universities has quadrupled since the 1970s, far faster than total population growth. It means we are creating the educated workforce that you've heard the group talk about today. And finally, DFW hospitals, not only enormous employers, but total employment has gone up 25% just the last 15 years. It's one of the fastest growing industries we have here. Last couple of things I want to say real fast, and I'll stop. One is I want to maybe try out a sort of general synthesis of how this fits together with what Rick and Mike said. I would absolutely agree 100% that economic freedom over the long haul, to quote Mike, makes cities rich. I would also argue that once cities reach a certain degree of wealth, they tend to build these kinds of institutions, and then the institutions turn around in a virtuous cycle and make cities richer. Now, I think we also need to be a little bit nervous that there's substantial evidence, I think, that cities that become very rich and very well educated also sometimes develop political preferences for policies that undermine the economic freedom that got them there. But I'll leave it to the economic freedom experts to try to make sense of that. But in the case of Dallas-Fort Worth, I think the big story is we have played catch up from a late start, both economically and in terms of educating our public, developing the institutions that essentially are making us a modern knowledge-centric economy. But we are catching up very, very fast. Last point I want to make is, going forward, what should we do? Very simply, of course, we should remain economically free. Could not agree more. We also should do all we can to build our institutions still further. One institution I did not talk about, because you get to hear from Joe May here in just a moment, is Dallas College, which plays a gigantic role, arguably the biggest in educating large numbers of people in the Dallas area. I didn't talk about it because my presentation is mostly on research-based institutions, but the general proposition is there is no path to economic success that does not create a better educated public, a vast, highly educated workforce. Dallas has been successful at that, but we got to stay at it. Thank you.
All right, Cullum, take your slides away.
Sorry, sir.
And we will now hear from Joe May, although Cullum's already provided a great introduction.
Okay.
And thank you so much. And Rick, Cullum, thank you. And certainly I've enjoyed our partnership both with the Bush Institute and with SMU. So thank you for including us today. And I kind of want to jump right in as we think about the role of higher education, and particularly the role of Dallas College. And for many of you, that's a recent change since June of this year. Prior to that, we were known as the Dallas County Community College District. Many people refer to us as the DCCD, but certainly including our great campuses throughout the region, which include, of course, Brookhaven, Richland, Eastfield, Cedar Valley, Mountain View, El Centro, and North Lake, all collectively working together to meet the needs. And I think this is really a reflection on the change that's occurred in the economy. Cullum, I was thinking about it as you, even the title, talking about anchor institutions. I'm pretty certain that back in 1965, which means we're certainly one of the newest institutions when we were created, that folks weren't thinking about community colleges playing the role that they now play in higher education. They weren't thinking about the fact at that time that since that point, we've served over 3 million people in the North Texas area. And most wouldn't have guessed that this year we'll serve over 165,000 students through our various programs and offering. We were really seen as a stopgap institution, one that was really about creating opportunity for individuals to pursue a baccalaureate degree, and in some cases prepare for jobs that may be emerging in the workforce. And certainly supporting institutions like SMU and the other top tier institutions in the area as we help meet that important higher education need. But I don't think that we realized what was going to be happening with the economy. If you just think back to that time in 1965, less than 25% of the jobs required some type of post-secondary education. In other words, you could get a great paying middle-class job, but actually not even having a high school diploma in many cases. You fast forward to today, and look what's going on in North Texas with some of our recent research in this area. What we're seeing is of the job openings that are occurring over the past calendar year, and it varies a little bit about region of the community, but roughly about 70% of the jobs are requiring some type of post-secondary credential, meaning something beyond high school. It may not necessarily be a bachelor's degree or advanced degree, many of them requiring industry-based certifications, other short-term certification, associate's degrees, but all really aligned in recognizing the fact that today, almost all jobs require some education beyond high school. And when you look at the new jobs, I was thinking about that earlier, even as we think about what used to consider kind of mundane organizations as we look at fulfillment centers and the warehouse industry, now needing robotic expertise, computer expertise, knowledge and ability to really keep the technology operating today, and certainly meaning that we need a different type of workforce than we needed only a few years ago. But here's the challenge. We're well aware that as we look at the North Texas area, we have been a mecca for job creation. That's been clear throughout the conversation, and the job growth in the variety of areas have borne that out. But the reality is that we're importing still a lot of the talent into the area. And we're still struggling with our high school graduates to get them with the knowledge, the skills, the ability that's needed in order to be successful in today's job requirements and the workforce needs. And that's not yet even fully anticipating the changes that we've already plotted out and see happening as a result of artificial intelligence, of automation, as was described earlier. And so the job requirements and the need for post-secondary education has changed. And yet I think our thinking about it in a lot of cases really hasn't changed. We still tend to think about higher ed jobs and higher education being really focused on 4-year degrees, and that's certainly important, and that's going to continue to be a fast growing need in terms of what's happening in the workforce. It's just clear as you look at the nature of some of the work, but also what often gets missed is the growth of professional and technical jobs that certainly is a sweet spot for Dallas College, but also in collaboration with many of our other institutions in the area. And certainly as we know, and I really appreciate the list on what companies are considering when they're looking at locating to the area, and obviously things like taxes matter, things like real estate matter, and that, but increasingly talent matters as well. And looking at communities that can provide the other attributes along with a high quality talent is going to be what keeps a community competitive in the future. And certainly, if we're to continue to be an engine of economic growth, we obviously want to attract talent to the area, but we also want to grow talent in the area, making sure that we've got the academically qualified, the technical qualified, the professionally qualified workforce, individuals with the technical skills to really support some of the changes that are occurring that many refer to as the fourth industrial revolution, whether it be what's occurring in cybersecurity, and as we all struggle in order to stay integrated into our systems and operating appropriately today, to increase moving to the cloud and changing how we're operating. I'm going to put up my only slide that I have relates to, and I'm going to hopefully is the slide up? Can you see it there? Great, thanks. The topic today I was asked to chat about is career-connected learning, and actually there was an article in the Dallas Morning News today related to Dallas Thrives, and which is really bringing together all the organizations and entities that it takes in order to prepare a workforce. And if this slide looks complicated, it's because it is. And that's because it really does take a network of organizations in order to meet the needs of a single individual to transition from coming really out of their early school years through the K-12 system, through community colleges, into universities, in and out of the workforce as we see that changing. And what makes this a challenge, and by the way, I should point out on the right-hand side of this, our great partners in the area, of course, SMU, UNT Dallas, Texas A&M Commerce, Texas Women's University, others, as well as employers that work with us on a daily basis to ensure that our programs are aligned to meet the needs and that we're aligned with those institutions to meet the needs. But I want to point out the challenge on this, and that's the dotted lines. Because every single place there's a dotted line, if you look, and a gap, that means that there is a handoff that has to occur. And that's between high school and college, that's between community colleges and universities, that's in and out of the workforce, even things as basic as public transportation, universally available, but often difficult to access for individuals and students as it ties to their education need. And so what we've tried to do is collaborate with our K-12 partners, with our university partners, and with our employers to really bridge that gap and to make this work. And this has become really more important during the COVID pandemic, and more difficult, as often collaborations do require sitting down face-to-face, working out together between businesses, education institutions, chambers of commerce, economic development organizations, and others, as we strive to meet the needs, whether it be in virtually any of the sectors, from healthcare, as Cullum mentioned earlier, but to aviation, energy, manufacturing, logistics. all of these matter a great deal as we strive to look at how to provide the talent. And I just want to mention a few of these that are critical. Dallas has become really known in our K-12 system in partnership with higher education around what's called P-TECH, or Pathways in Technology High Schools. And what that brings together is K-12, community colleges, universities, and employers, all to help students get the knowledge, skills, and ability they need in order to get jobs. And right now, Dallas-Fort Worth has more than any other state in the nation in terms of programs available to students to meet this. And let me just kind of give you the importance of the 14 school districts that we partner with. This year it will be 57 P-TECH high schools. We're adding 20 more next year. The next year we'll add 10, so we'll quickly be up to 70 of those. But in 2019, there were 900 students that graduated from high school and earned their associate degree at the same time in one of these pathways. In 2020, there were 2,066, over double the number. That number is going to continue to go up. The importance of that is virtually all of that 2,066, almost none of them would have been projected to earn any type of post-secondary credential without this collaboration and engagement and working together. Meaning now that those 2,066, 92% of them will successfully transfer into our universities, and the bulk of them will go on to earn baccalaureate degrees. It's this type of collaboration of coming together that I think is what is unique in North Texas. It's important that we work together. And frankly, it requires businesses, education institutions, K-12, all of us to do what I call the opposite of hoarding. In other words, how do we really kind of drop our guards, work together, not look at it just in terms of what's in it for us, but look at it what is to the benefit of our institutions and organizations. Next, what we're going to see are more career-connected learning opportunities through apprenticeship programs, youth apprenticeship programs, internships. That type of connection to the workforce is absolutely essential if we're to meet the needs of our community. And I think, Rick, I think I'm out of time, and so I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share what's going on, and let me unshare my screen, and I will turn it back to you.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank everybody. We are pretty much out of our allotted time, so we have some questions, and we're going to have to leave them unanswered. Many of them involve people wanting to get the slides from the presenters, and so we haven't thought about that in advance. And so we will talk about it and see how we can accommodate those people. Anyway, thank you, Susan. Thank
Certainly.
you, Colin. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Mike. We appreciate it.
Right.
Appreciate it. Take care.